Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back for another episode of Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all these posts on Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. First, we have GOP lawmaker proposes making RFK Jr.'s dietary guidelines law from news.bgov.com, posted by Lost Little Egg, who said, "Nothing better than the government legislating how you should eat." And I would agree with that. I don't think the government should be legislating anything regarding health or wellness or anything for that matter. If people want to follow RFK Jr.'s dietary guidelines, I think they should be able to. If they don't follow their own other dietary guidelines, they should be able to. The government shouldn't be legislating any matters when it comes to health. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have all new cars could have mandatory surveillance tech unless Congress stops this mandate, from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't think cars should have mandatory surveillance tech, but ultimately, if the government does want to force them to do so, to have it, ultimately the government usually can get what it wants since it has the control of the law and the legal authority on the use of force. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have the problem is that there's any kind of quote-unquote health authority and that hospitals, doctors, and caregivers listen to these people and craft policies based on what they say, posted by Mazda Prophet. And that looks like a screenshot of a tweet from C3, who said, "Never forget, Deborah Birx lied to President Trump and manipulated data about guidelines, lockdown, and vaccines. Anthony Fauci made remdesivir and ventilators hospital protocol even though he knew it was killing patients. They must pay for their crimes. Pure evil." And yeah, I would agree with that. The government shouldn't be telling private hospitals what they can and can't do or what medicines people can and can't take. Ultimately, I would say that's like for everything else, but, the problem is the government's involved at all. Or ideally, the health system would be privately run so the government wouldn't have control over it, and that's my thoughts there. Next, we have U.S. debt tops 100% of GDP from WSJ.com, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's cross-post from the economics subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't think that's good, but it just goes to show you the debt's going to grow regardless of which branch of the party is in power. The GOP might market itself as fiscally conservative, but they're just like the Democrats, tax and spend, and it just goes to show you that a lot of politics is really just theater. The two major parties, they also aka the Uniparty, pretty agree with each other on like 95% of issues, but you would never know that just by going on social media or engaging with legacy media. You'd think they disagree on everything. Well, in reality, I think that's very much not the case. They both love to spend and throw money away and grow the national debt, and that's my thoughts there. Next, we have Elon Musk said something that really stuck with me about resource allocation, posted by Mazda Prophet, who said, "In essence, beyond a certain level of wealth, money is no longer about consumption, it's about capital allocation. That sentence changes everything. Economics at its core is just an allocation problem. You have finite resources and infinite uses. Who decides where what goes? Imagine a school playground, 100 kids, packs of Pokemon cards handed out at random. You've let it play out. Very quickly, an order emerges. The good players accumulate rare cards. The collectors sort. The negotiators strike deals. No one planned it, and yet every card ends up in the hands of the one who gets most value from it. The system maximizes the total happiness of the playground. That's the invisible hand. Now bring in the teacher. She finds it unfair. Leo has 50 cards. Tom has 3. She confiscates, redistributes, enforces equality. These free media effects. The good players stop playing. What's the point? The bad ones have no reason to improve. They get their share anyway. Trades collapse. The playground is equal and dead. She maximized equality. She destroyed happiness. The teacher's problem is that she can't have the information on the playground has collectively. That's Mises's economic calculation problem formulated in 1920. The USSR tried to solve for 70 years with the Gauss plan. Result: shortages, line collapse, not because the Soviets were stupid, because the problem is mathematically unsolvable in centralized mode. When Musk has $200 billion, he doesn't consume it. He allocates it. SpaceX, Starlink, Neuralink, XAI. Every dollar is a bet on the future, and he has a track record. PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX. He's demonstrating he knows how to spot massive problems and allocate resources to them with spectacular returns. The state has a track record too. Hospitals collapsing, education declining, debt exploding, public services degrading despite constantly rising budgets. The market identifies good allocators. Politics identifies good communicators. Profit isn't the end goal, it's a signal. It says you've allocated scarce resources to use that people value enough to pay for. The bigger the profit, the greater the value created. When Starlink turns profitable, it means millions of people in rural areas finally have internet. When a ministry runs a deficit, it means it's consuming more than it produces. resources, one creates, the other destroys, and we call that redistribution. In our societies, there are two categories of actors: entrepreneurs and bureaucrats. The entrepreneur takes personal risk to spot a problem, mobilize resources, create a solution. If he's wrong, he loses. If he's right, his customers win, his employees win, his suppliers win, the state collects taxes. He's the basic cell of human progress. The bureaucrat takes no personal risk. His salary is guaranteed. At best, he maintains his existing rent. At worst, he destroys it through overregulation, forced bad allocation, perverse incentives that discourage those who produce, but it is not no case does he create. Look at the last 50 years. iPhone, civilian internet, SpaceX, Tesla, Google, Apple, Amazon, Stripe, mRNA, ChatGPT, all private inventions driven by entrepreneurs, funded by venture capital. Not a single ministry has invented anything that's changed your daily life. France has become the world's laboratory for bureaucracy at 57% of GDP in public spending, an absolute record. A sprawling administration, a tax system that penalizes wealth creation, result falling behind the United States, Germany, Switzerland, brain drain, deindustrialization, exploding debt, and the worst part is that bad allocation self-reinforces. The more the state takes, the less entrepreneurs create. The less they create, the less tax base there is. The more the state borrows in taxes. Perfect negative feedback loop. The teacher thinks she's helping, and every year the playground produces less. In our societies, it's always the entrepreneurs who advance civilization. Bureaucrats at best maintain a rent, at worst they destroy it. No societies ever progress by tax careers to subsidized managers. The question is never who has how much, it's who allocates the next unit of resource best to maximize humanity's future. The answer hasn't changed 200 years, it's not the civil servants. And then they link to a tweet from, I guess that the tweet where that was really from some guy named Bravel on Twitter, and that's where the tweet who originally said all that, I guess. And yeah, I would agree with all that. Ultimately, a lot of money is just about whose resources should go where, and that's why I think the libertarian position is, ultimately people should be managing your own money rather than having the state manage it, and that's why I think the ideal libertarian position is get the state out of money, just like to get the state out of everything else. But when it comes to money, people are going to want centralized systems like with time and language, so it's easier to trade between people and interact with other people. And yeah, so that's my thoughts there. So I would pretty much agree with all that. And yeah, let's see what the next post is. Next post we have, remember that Trump said Second Amendment, people could do something about Hillary Clinton, from youtube.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And that's cross post from the video subreddit. Trump remarks on what Second Amendment is for, or Second Amendment people can do about Clinton, from KPX, CBS News Bay Area. And yeah, personally, that's Trump for you. He's always been all about putting outrageous bait both in social media and in real life. Personally, after the first time, you just kind of get, after the first 2,000 times, you just kind of get numb to it. Ultimately, if he wants to say whatever crazy thing he wants to say, I think he should be able to. That's freedom of speech. Of course, Reddit, that they're all about, the right is super violent, but whenever the left's violent, they'll always have an excuse. So ultimately, I think political violence, if you want to justify political violence, justify whatever you want to. But ultimately, political violence, that's just another team thing. Reddit will say, the right's full of political violence, we'll make an excuse for all the leftist political violence we've been seeing. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Palantir CEO says legalizing war crimes would be good for business, from Futurism.com, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's a cross post from the Law subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't think they should legalize war crimes. But I like the top comment here by Getting Lucky, who said, "What's the last time there were consequences for war crimes? War crimes are already essentially illegal, especially if you're on the winning side. No one's going to charge the winner of the war with any crimes." And that's my thoughts there. Next we have U.S. falls below Ukraine and press freedom as global autocracy takes hold, from MarsTechnica.com, posted by Patam 13. And yeah, personally, I think it's interesting. Reddit always says, Ukraine is this democratic paradise, but now they're saying there's marketing that the U.S. is falling below Ukraine and press freedom as a bad thing. Ultimately, I think the U.S. does have some press freedom issues, but ultimately, I think increasingly with the press, we have to distinguish between the corporate press and the actual press. The corporate press, Reddit hates big business, but the corporate press are exclusively run by big business and always push narratives to keep people divided and at each other's throats. Well, increasingly, you have social media and the real press go questioning what the official narrative is, and that's what I would say the real press is. Reddit, they love press freedom, but then someone says something they don't like in the press, and they always say though they should be fired, and then they use their cancel culture on them, and it just goes to show you that Reddit's always like, Reddit doesn't really care about press freedom. They just care that their narratives are allowed to exfoliate. Well, the opposing narratives all should be censored, and that's all my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, without government, who would use the power of the state to selectively target religious leaders, hosted by Maz the Prophet, and that's a screenshot of an article from Just News. IRS weaponized Johnson Amendment to target conservative pastors while ignoring liberals, DOJ fines, and then it's a screenshot of, I guess, someone saying that's talking about the story on Real America's Voice. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but ultimately the government can justify doing whatever it wants to justify, and if they want to justify going after people who are considered they consider to be in the out group, ultimately, they can go after you for any reason whatsoever, and also, a lot of times there's nothing you can do about it since the state controls the courts and legal system as well. Next we have Oregon. Gary Harrington built 3 reservoirs on his 170-acre property to collect rainwater. The state demanded he drain every drop. He refused. They hit him with 9 misdemeanors, jailed him for 30 days, and fined him more than $15,000. This is government claiming ownership of the sky. From X.com, posted by Maz the Prophet, and that looks like a tweet from a number at my hidden value. And yeah, it just goes to show you that the government, if they want to, they can arrest you for whatever reason they feel like. If you build your own reservoir and the government doesn't like it, they can come after you for that. And it just goes to show you that it doesn't really matter what you're doing. If the government doesn't like it, they can come after you. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Trump family backed drone firm sightings of weapons deal with U.S. Put from Bloomberg.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, it just goes to show you that the state is, people are naturally going to want to enrich themselves and their allies. People are ultimately going to be inherently self-serving. But Reddit only cares about that in regards to the Orange Man and anyone in the outgroup. It's like I said in another comment on the narco-capitalism subreddit. Maz the Prophet said USAID funded aid programs abroad, but mainly was jobs programs for progressives, and they linked to an article from Midas.org. And Iyer said, I love how Reddit cares about Trump using government to enrich himself and his cronies, but they're completely silent when their team does the same thing when they're in power in regards to pumping money into progressive NGOs. And yeah, it just goes to show you that, people are going to be inherently self-serving. They'll go after the other team with the most intense fervor, will constantly make excuses for their own team. And yeah, that's why I don't really care for politics. It's really just a circle jerk. My team good, your team bad. 80% of people can't think of politics other than what their teams tell them. And yeah, personally, I think that's why a good reason to be libertarian. You should be questioning the narratives rather than and not making excuses for people because they're on your team. Rather, you should be holding everyone to account. But sadly, that seems to be the exception rather than the rule these days. Next, we have Trump had 60 days to end the Iran war. Instead, he's just pretending it's over, from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But, ultimately, that's how the news cycle works. Eventually, it will just move on to something else. And yeah, I don't really care for it, but that's how life works these days. Social media is always going to go away on what the current thing is, and sadly, it looks like the Iran war's time as the current thing is coming to the end. The U.S. might still be bombing Iran, but the U.S. is always pretty much bombing somewhere, and yeah, that's just how U.S. foreign policy works. There's always got to be bombing somewhere, and constantly got to be involved in somewhere as the world police. I like how Trump on the campaign trail said we're not going to be the world police anymore. America first. But then he gets into office and he says, well, we're the world police. Israel first. And it just goes to show you, they'll say one thing on the campaign trail and then they'll stab you in the back. Pretty much every politician except for a select few, like Thomas Massie, I would say. Next, we have Trump just said it is treasonous to say that the U.S. is not winning in Iran, from YouTube.com, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's crosspost from the Live News 24H subreddit, and that looks like a YouTube video from CNN. Trump considers it treasonous for those whatever, I guess saying you're not winning in Iran. And yeah, personally, if you want to think the U.S. is winning in Iran, you should be able to. If you think the U.S. is losing in Iran, you should be able to ultimately think whatever you want. Don't let the state think for you. A lot of people just let the state or their whatever media conglomerate they follow think for them. I think people need to learn to think for themselves. That's very much the libertarian way. Next we have, I have never understood why it is greed to want to keep the money you've earned, but not greed to want to take somebody else's money. Thomas Sowell, and that's a quote that Maz the Prophet shared. And I agree. I'd agree with that. But ultimately, if people want to take other people's money and they have the force of the state, they can take away whatever money they want. I think it's interesting. We live in a society built on consent, yet taxation is inherently anti-consensual, yet it's completely fine. And that's very much the libertarian perspective on that matter, I would say. Next, we have Trump flouts lower court rulings in unprecedented display of executive power from APnews.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But if Trump wants to justify doing that, ultimately, he hasn't been held accountable for anything so far. What does he have to fear? So that's very much how power works. If you're in a position of power, oftentimes you're not going to be held accountable. And sadly, that's how it works a lot of the time. Next we have A Pointless War, How Iran Hawks Finally Got Their Way from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, personally I don't really care for the Iran war, but ultimately, the U.S. always wants to go to war somewhere, and Iran just skirt one now. It looks like they're going to get involved in Cuba soon. And ultimately, I don't really care for any war, but the U.S. has shown that just is constantly getting involved in other countries' affairs. And it's interesting. Both Obama and Trump and Obama before him campaigned on America first, but they just continued the status quo. It just goes to show you that it doesn't really matter who's in power. The status quo is going to continue, because in a lot of respects, I think it's because a lot of elected officials are just figureheads. The people who are running the show are the deep state bureaucrats and the alpha agencies like FBI, CIA, and et cetera, and other private and special interests like the military-industrial complex. And yeah, that's my thoughts there. Next we have Hospitals and Insurers Are Getting Rich Off Medicaid Fraud from townhall.com, posted by Maz the Prophet. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But ultimately, people are gonna want to enrich themselves first and foremost. Sometimes of using questionable legal means, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. And that's the great ways why we shouldn't have anyone in charge, because people are going to be inherently self-serving and seek to benefit themselves first and foremost. And when you're in a position of power, that's an easy way of going about it. Next, we have Trump says it's treasonous to say U.S. is not winning a war in Iran from independent.co.uk, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the Law subreddit. And yeah, look, we talked about this one earlier. If Trump wants to say that, it's fine, but the U.S. government shouldn't be stopping people's freedom of speech. If people want to say the U.S. is not winning the war in Iran, they should be able to. And government censorship definitely isn't the option. But Reddit loved government censorship when the Biden president was pushing social media companies censor narratives that went against their COVID narrative. But when Trump says something, Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever. Ultimately, it just goes to show you most people don't have any consistent values or principles, only teams. Next, we have Truth, posted by Maz the Prophet. Freedom Explained. You are free to have a gun. You are free to have a religion. You are not free to use your gun to take away the freedom of others. You are not free to use your religion to take away the freedom of others. And I would agree with all that. Ultimately, I think freedom is very much an individual. People should be able to do whatever they want, but they shouldn't be forcing other people to bend to their will if they don't feel like it. And that's very much the libertarian position. Libertarian position is I do me, you do you. And I think that's a very good way of going about the world. Next, we have Hypocrisy at Peak, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's a crosspost from the SIPC subreddit, and it's a meme. The guy on the left was arrested and convicted for illegally selling missiles to Iran during the Reagan administration. The guy on the right is a Fox News military analyst who thinks Iran shouldn't have missiles. They're the same guy, and yeah, it looks like it's both Oliver North back then and today. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but ultimately, it just goes to show you that, people are always, everyone's a hypocrite to some extent, I would say. And yeah, I definitely see a lot of it when it comes to politics. I would agree on that. Next we have, if you could pass one piece of legislation tomorrow, what would it be? Posted by Jacob Anders, and that's cross-post from the polls subreddit. And the options on that poll are universal basic income, ending Trump's wars, universal college education, universal health care, abolish ICE, affordable housing for all. And I personally would of those options, I'd probably go for ending Trump's wars. If I could pass any piece of legislation, it'd probably just be dissolve the federal government at this point. It's clear that people aren't happy with it, and it's just going to be used to punish those in the out group while rewarding those in the in group. So at this point, I think we should just give up, let the states go their ways for a little, and maybe we can get back together in a couple decades when we're more confident we can set something up that's a little better than what we have today. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And it looks like that's it for we have a new post. Trump flouts lower court ruling. It's an unprecedented display of executive power from apnews.com, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, we already got that, but we had the exact same post from Ninja Lover a few posts ago, so I think we're going to skip over that. And yeah, it looks like that's it, so we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.